What follows is an interview I had with Professor Batmanathan Daya Reddy, also known as Professor Daya Reddy, who is the interim Vice Chancellor at the University of Cape Town, where he is also an Emeritus Professor of Applied Mathematics. Professor Reddy received his PhD from the University of Cambridge in 1977 at the age of 24. After a brief postdoc at the University College London, he then moved back to South Africa, taking up a lectureship at the University of Cape Town, where he remained for the rest of his career. Now, while there, he has held a number of key leadership positions. For example, he was the Dean of the Faculty of Sciences beginning in 1999. Professor Reddy has also been a founding member of long-lasting research institutes. For example, at the University of Cape Town, he founded the Center for Research in Computational and Applied Mechanics, CERECAM. He was also a founding member alongside the South African-born physicist Neil Turok of the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, which has centers in 5 African countries: South Africa, Senegal, Cameroon, Ghana, and Rwanda. Now, given all these impressive things that Professor Daya Reddy has done, that can really impress anyone. For me personally, what really speaks to me is how he is an embodiment of the whole idea of interdisciplinary work. For example, when the University of Stellenbosch conferred upon him an honorary doctorate in 2021, they said he has built bridges between the mathematical, engineering, and the medical sciences. They also said that he has wrestled with problems that defy rigid disciplinary pigeonholing. And it is for this work that he has done that he was also awarded the National Order of Mapungubwe by the South African President, which is really the highest honor anyone can receive in South Africa. So I hope you enjoy this interview I had with Professor Daya Reddy just as much as I did, because really I had a ball.
Professor Reddy, we have never really had a guest on this channel before. So to have you as our first guest is really remarkable. So for that, thank you so much and welcome to the channel.
Thank you very much, Gqeberha. Really great pleasure to be here, and it's a privilege to be interviewed by you. Thank you very much.
All right. So as you were born in 1953 in Port Elizabeth, what is now known as Gqeberha. So growing up as a young boy in the 1950s and 60s, both in Gqeberha and then later on in Cape Town, what do you remember as the kind of experiences that inspired you to pursue a career in science?
Well, I should say that, indeed, I was born and I spent the first 15 years or so of my life in Port Elizabeth, Gqeberha, and then my last 2 years of school were actually spent in Johannesburg, so before I came to Cape Town, by which time my family also had moved to Cape Town. You know, I decided quite late on a particular career that I wanted to pursue. Earlier on in my discussions, chats with friends, and also my parents and others, I knew what I didn't want to do. I never wanted to do medicine. It held no attraction for me. At one stage, I wanted to be a teacher, and then it was really very late. In fact, it was in my last 2 years of school when I was persuaded, in a sense, by a teacher to think about engineering rather than the sciences, but engineering as a career. The motivation being, or his motivation being, well, you really enjoy maths and science, and you'd like to have a career where you can put these to use. Well, you can do that in engineering. So that really, very simply, is what set me off on that track.
Yeah. I also enjoyed mathematics and physical sciences in high school, and I've had a discussion with a friend of mine who also became an engineer. We tend, at least in South Africa, if we enjoy those, to go into engineering there isn't much room to go into mathematics or physics. So yeah, that's interesting. So now you went on, you finished your undergraduate, then you went on to do a PhD at Cambridge. But given the horizons that open to you when you're in Cambridge and the marginalization of the global South, right, when it comes to doing research, things you've mentioned in the past, such as people from the global South finding themselves not being equal partners in collaboration and that sort of thing. Why did you then decide to go back to South Africa and spend your entire career there?
Well, for many people, this was a completely counterintuitive move. Think about the realities of apartheid. In fact, while I studied at Cambridge, I used to spend a lot of time in London, where a number of my family members were living on my mother's side. And many of them, in fact, were political exiles. These were the family members with whom I discussed what I was planning to do. I had, in fact, applied for one or two positions in the UK, academic positions, and I was offered quite a good position in Aberdeen in Scotland. But I thought that, look, I'd like to come home and spend some time with my family. That is the one thing. Secondly, though I would be returning to apartheid South Africa and also potentially, isolation in other terms, in academic terms as well, I was strongly influenced by somebody whom I regard as a mentor, a real mentor in my life, and that was the late Professor John Martin. So John Martin had been the head of civil engineering when I was an undergraduate here, and in fact he had encouraged me to do postgraduate study abroad. His argument being that postgraduate study and research, particularly in engineering and other areas, was not quite non-existent, but really in an embryonic state, and it would be the best thing for me to go abroad. We'd kept in touch, and so I was offered a position here as well, and it was really a combination of my wish to return, spend some time with my family, and that I knew what I would be returning to, meaning the department and his leadership. That really swung it for me. I thought, fine, I'll come home for 3 years and then see what happens. Things worked out differently, of course, but my intention at the time was not to come back and stay forever.
I think, based on the work that you were able to do, I think you don't regret that decision.
No, not at all.
All right, I'm glad. So the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, for which you're a founding member, so it has this belief, or this initiative, the Next Einstein Initiative, which is the belief that the next Einstein will be African. Yeah. I've also found myself wondering at times why we don't have any African Fields Medalists or Nobel laureates in the sciences. And it's not that I care much that Africans receive these accolades, but more about Africa having the sort of institutions that can produce people and support them with the work at this level. So as someone who has been a leader in science and in institutions, what do you think it will take to build institutions or recreate the ones that we have to do this?
Yeah, so, okay, firstly, there have been a few African Nobel laureates in the sciences in the following sense. And I would refer here, for example, to Alan Cormack, who was responsible for the development of the CAT scan, and Aaron Klug for his work in molecular biology. And so both of those men were South Africans, but I would refer also to Ahmed Zewail, who was an Egyptian and who got the Nobel Prize for his work on femtosecond lasers. All of them did their work elsewhere, of course.
Yeah.
Cormack in the States, Klug at Cambridge, and Zewail at, he was in the US. Your question remains, and I think you've put your finger on it. What would it take for Africa to have a Fields Medalist or a Nobel laureate here in Africa? Somebody doing most of their work here in Africa. Well, it's something that I've been discussing a great deal. In the International Science Council, looking at this question from the perspective of the Global South, but also in organizations that I'm involved in here, looking at the perspective from either South African or an African point of view. And in fact, I've been doing a fair amount of work with organizations like UNESCO on issues pertaining to scientific development in Africa. There are a few things here. First of all, the people who won Nobel Prizes, the Africans who won Nobel Prizes, went elsewhere. And they went elsewhere because they were able there really to pursue their careers and their ambitions, knowing that there were strong networks of experts, well-resourced, opportunities were abundant, etc. Much of which would not be present here. So I think it's not as if this is going to happen overnight, but some of the key elements are, first of all, we have to build critical masses of experts, of researchers in the different areas. And in different parts of Africa. By critical mass, I mean what you want is one or more senior people, maybe from the diaspora or maybe homegrown, together with cohorts of junior colleagues, postdocs, graduate students, and so on, properly resourced. And I think that with all of that, well, that would be one element of it. The second element is the one of connections and inclusion. In other words, we have to be part of the center of things, and we have to be seen to be at the center of things, full participants, beyond simply, talking to people in Europe and North America, let's say. And there I think there's work to do at our end and at the other end in the global north about really including colleagues from the global south in partnerships in the fullest sense of the word, equitable partnerships where you set the agendas together and you go from there. Just by the way, with a group of African research universities called ARUA, the Alliance of Research Universities in Africa. It's about 16 universities, together with substantial funding from the European Union. Exactly this kind of set of what are called clusters of excellence are being developed in partnerships with colleagues in Europe, in European Union countries, but with colleagues from one or other of our 16 universities being full partners, very well funded, top people, because we have top people here, top people here. And I'm very, very enthusiastic and optimistic about the future of these clusters of research excellence. So that is one. And I think we need to have a lot of this and build the critical mass at the same time. It's not I don't think there'll be overnight successes, but I think that in due course, with the will to push this along, we'll see those results.
Okay, I'm really glad that you are positive about this, given the state of things in South Africa and say Africa. Sometimes people lose hope on anything really. So I'm really glad that you are not only positive, but are one of the people involved in pushing these kind of things forward. On a less positive note, so you find that the mental health challenges, I think, in the academy, not only among students, but also sometimes amongst faculty. And of course, this is not something that's unique to the University of Cape Town, and this is not something new. So I'm just wondering what initiatives or efforts are there at the University of Cape Town to continue to support the mental health of its students, but also faculty.
Yeah, well, a really important topic. I think that it's fair to say that that mental health, first of all, recognizing it as an issue, has been perhaps of a secondary nature. I'm talking historically, but COVID, I think, probably has been one of the major triggers, because one of the consequences of COVID, the lockdowns and isolation and all of that, and difficulties in returning to study or returning to work, coping with new modes of working, have led to mental health issues surfacing, whether or not they were there in the past. We've recognized this at the University of Cape Town as a key issue, and we recognize the need also when thinking about health, let's say of our students or our staff faculty members, when thinking about health broadly, we automatically almost should be including mental health and asking those questions as well, and that is what we are doing. So we have an office that is devoted to health more broadly, but with one of the focal points being mental health, and then we have a well-structured system of referrals for students and for staff members to medical practitioners, either inside the university or externally. So it's something we don't take lightly at all, and I think that even if we had been inclined to do so, our SRC, for example, has raised this issue time and again with us. So it's come a long way, I would say, with regard to taking it seriously and doing something about it.
All right, thank you. So another thing is, again, this brings back maybe the SRC. We find that we have the same kind of protests every year at our South African universities. And I think the troubling part is the fact that they are almost always about the same thing, to the extent that we can even put them on a calendar, we know what's going to happen. And it always boils down to financial strains on this parts of the students, right? And it makes you wonder, what is the role of a university in a society? Now, you can answer that broadly, but also in particular, what is the role of a UCT in South Africa? Because we do know, right, that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, but also education on balance is the most effective, mobility tool for individuals. So don't then universities have some sort of moral duty, but of course, in collaboration with the government, to offer education to any willing individual in South Africa?
Yeah, sure. Look, there are a few points there in your question. Let me start with the last point about the moral duty or obligation on the part of government, and I would say that there is a moral responsibility on the part of society in general to ensure that we are able to provide education to all. Now, most definitely school education. When it comes to university education, I would say yes to a great extent, in the sense of making higher education available to all of those who are able to succeed, and for whom that is the, shall we say, the appropriate path. What I mean here is, let's say a student wishes to pursue a particular career for which a certain degree program is appropriate, then that obviously would make sense. For another student who is uncertain about what they want to do, I'm not sure about whether they're cut out for higher education, whether they would want to do it, whether they would like it. I think there is an intermediate step there that involves advising the student about what to do. Higher education, a university of technology, what should it be? That is the first part. Now, I do believe, and it is an ideal, I would say, of UCT to be able to function as follows: that we admit students who have the potential to succeed at university. So that's the first step, admit the student. Then we ask questions around finances. In other words, it's not subject to, you're having enough money, etc., or your parents, but first of all, do you have the potential to succeed? If so, yes, fine. Here is your letter of acceptance. Congratulations. Now let's look at the whole thing. Fees, the financial side of it, and of course we have in place a system. Well, we have the National Student Funding System, NSFAS, but at UCT for a very long time now we've had a system which really amounts to a combination of loans and grants, and which is means related. And which I would say, together with national funding, to a great extent, would meet those financial needs. Not comprehensively so, and I think that there are inevitably students who are not able to continue for financial reasons. So our goal remains being able to ensure that all students who we believe are able to succeed should have a financial arrangement in place with our support and assistance that would in fact allow them to come to university. Coming to the protests, yes, you're absolutely right. The protests have to a great extent been around exactly this issue. Well, let's go back to fees must fall. But the protests at UCT this year were almost entirely around issues pertaining to student fee debt and insufficient funding from NSFAS nationally. And these are issues that we have to grapple with. When I say we, I mean the universities in South Africa see this as a national issue. And within USAF, University of South Africa, we are talking, that's all the Vice Chancellors, are talking about what we should be doing about this. Just last week, there was a meeting with the Minister of Higher Education, Minister Nzimande, about all of this, and we have to see where it goes. I think the problem has not been completely addressed yet, and Meanwhile, within UCT, we are asking the same question: what is it that we should be doing so that we don't once again, come January, February, have protests? So we are reviewing our fee policy, and we are hoping to take something to the council in October, which will get us to the point at which we have a fee policy which is equitable, which is fair, which allows the university to receive and collect the fees that it needs to have, else we don't survive, but which will not be punitive or place the kind of burden, particularly on students who come from poor families, a burden of the kind that, in fact, they are just not able to carry. So we'll have to see where that goes. The role of university in society, well, there is if you like, the narrow perspective on that, being institutions which are in a position to educate students, train students, so that they can take up careers in industry and elsewhere, in the professions and otherwise. But I think universities have a broader role than that. They have a key role to play with regard to culture in our society, in our country, with promoting particular values, with regard to educating young people in the broadest sense of the word, not about this or that discipline, about it being an opportunity for young people to learn how to think critically, to argue critically, to analyze, tools which will equip them really for the rest of their lives. And so, very often the shall we say, the non-goal-oriented aspects of universities are accorded some kind of secondary status. But I think they are absolutely important in the overall, shall we say, well, the culture of the country, and what universities are able to contribute to in engaging with society, because that's the other thing. Universities, I think, have a responsibility to be in continuous engagement with society.
All right. Thank you for that very broad response. It's really appreciated here. So for some people that may not know, you were the president, I believe the first one, of the International Science Council. And I've heard you speak in your capacity as president there about the efforts of that council to include people, towards really inclusion on the basis of race, gender, etc. And so, speaking about policies at UCT, what are UCT's policies or mandate really on inclusion?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, here I would turn to our what we refer to as Vision 2030, which is our vision and accompanying strategy for the university, which is founded on 3 pillars, namely excellence, transformation, and sustainability. Your question pertains, I would say, mainly to the second one of these pillars, in the following sense, and I would pose your question in the way in which it is often posed to ourselves. What exactly is the culture of the institution? What is its basis? To what extent does everybody feel that they belong here, students and staff, across race groups, genders, etc.? To what extent do people, members of the university, feel excluded? And there are many answers to these kinds of questions. Well, I should say, and I should then add, and what should we be doing about it? So this is a core element of our vision and our strategy. In other words, to arrive at a UCT where really everybody's here feels like they belong, you know, in the classroom, but socially as well. We have a culture, an institutional culture that reflects that, a diverse culture. I think in some respects, one might say that if we're not there, we are getting there. We are working towards that anyway. But there are examples from time to time that would appear to indicate the opposite, and we have to address those. In addition, I would refer to the whole business of relationships, and something that, by the way, we talk about very often in the university, which is relationships between our faculty members, our academic staff, and our administrative and professional staff. And it is the case that there are times when there's almost a kind of power dynamic here, which sees administrative staff treated not with the levels of respect that they ought to be. It's what somebody has referred to, not at UCT, but writing about all of this in a different context, about inequality of respect and appreciation. It kind of sums it up, which is not what we want, and something which we are alert to, aware of, working towards. The kind of thing you have to work on a continuous basis at different levels. We talk about it in the executive, but I chat about it with colleagues when I visit departments, or over coffee, informally as well, with students as well. So I think that inclusivity, or the goal of inclusivity, really has to do with getting to the point at which everybody feels that, well, they belong here. They are part of this family, if you like. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I understand that the questions I'm asking really, their answers are a bit complex and will take time. So moving on. So in one of your talks I found online, you speak about, for example, how to get started in doing research, and you talk about, really you must read the literature, but at some point you must get on with it quite quickly. And your argument for that was that builds your morale as a researcher to continue working on these projects, because sometimes they take a long time. And then you also talk about you as a young researcher at UCT being taken under the wing of a senior researcher, which I suppose is the late Professor Martin you spoke about.
Yes.
But I think both of these are really good pieces of advice. Do you have any more ideas on how young researchers can get started?
Yeah, referring to John Martin, indeed, I was privileged to have him as a mentor in that respect. I would say that I had two mentors. There was John Martin, and there was George Ellis, who was in applied mathematics, which I joined. I had a joint appointment and later moved over entirely to mathematics, to applied mathematics. And both of them, in fact, were mentors in the sense of ensuring that my research career got off to a good start. George and I mean, he's a cosmologist and he works in general relativity, and so we did not collaborate in that sense. But he had this broad view of things and knew how, almost gently, to push or steer in the right direction. Whereas with John Martin, he got me involved at a really early stage in collaborative research. He invited me to join him in writing a textbook, things like that. But your question really, I think, is about the situation in which an early career researcher may not have that mentor to hand. Let's take the other extreme. If you like, an individual, you've got your PhD, maybe you've had a postdoc, you land an academic position in such and such a department, and one of two things. Either you work in an area in which there is some critical mass. There are 2 or 3 colleagues working in the same area. The logical thing to do is to explore the feasibility of working with them, at the very least being guided by them, or perhaps beyond that, working with them, having those conversations. But let's suppose that you are pretty much on your own. Maybe people working in cognate areas, but no prospect of a collaboration. I think the role of the head of department and other senior people is extremely important here in guiding the individual. Well, okay, you know, your area of research is, let's say, fluid mechanics. There's nobody else working in fluid mechanics here. However, let's hear, you know, what is it that you want to do? Are you building on your PhD? Are you heading off in a different direction? You know, who are the strong people around at universities elsewhere in the country or beyond? What can we do about hooking you up with them so that you have not necessarily a collaborator, but you've got a sounding board. You have somebody who can guide and mentor you. So yeah, we're getting onto the possibility of externally based mentors. Somebody who will be sure that you do not have to, you know, find your way in a situation of complete solitude. It is so important to get those first steps right. And by the way, we had a workshop for heads of departments about a week ago, at which this was exactly one of the topics being discussed: the responsibility of heads, together with other senior colleagues, to get young colleagues off to the right start, because those first years are the toughest. You know, you are teaching a bunch of courses, probably all for the first time. You've got to prepare your notes, you've got to prepare your lectures, deliver them, and you have to get an independent research career off the ground. And it's very easy for the research to fall by the wayside, you know, because you've got, the lectures are, you know, there are your commitments. You have to present a lecture, you have to set the exam, all of that. You don't have those deadlines with research. And I said, well, you know, I'll leave it for the vacation, and come the vacation, and before you know, a year is gone, and you've done nothing. And I can tell you, you know, that probably has spelt the end of the research careers of many otherwise very promising young people. So it's a massive responsibility that heads have, but a responsibility on the part of the young person also to seek out these options or possibilities for linkages. You know, I get all the time, I get emails like this, you know, from younger people who, you know, sometimes they'd like to work with me, other times they just like some advice, or they'd like me to have a look at something they've written, and that's very good, and one should encourage that. So it's not an easy thing, but these are just some thoughts that I would have, you know, on this important topic.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I know my audience is people between the ages of 18 to 35, so I'm sure people interested in research will find that useful. I've also heard you stress the importance of researchers really conducting their research ethically and with integrity, on more than one occasion even. So imagine I'm a PI and I'm conducting research with a group of my students, and I have a lab. So what you suggest to be the kind of things that I would need to do to build that into the culture?
It's an area that I've been involved in one way or another for many, many years. Beyond whatever I've done as a researcher, working on topics such as responsible conduct in science, ethical issues, responsibilities, generally speaking, because we have freedoms, various freedoms as academics and researchers, and with these come responsibilities. I think that the whole business of responsible conduct in science is one that supervisors, and here I'm thinking about the postgraduate level, that supervisors really have a major responsibility to engage in with their students, not to wait until a problem arises, not at all. And there are so many issues here, going beyond the obvious ones, concerning fraud, fabrication, plagiarism, and so on. What not. But also other issues like such as the following. The postdoc or PhD student carries out some research, and it's all done and it's going to be written up now. And there's the question: who should be the authors? What should be the order of the authors? So, yeah, we have a major responsibility on the part of supervisors to discuss this at the outset, and also for themselves to adopt an ethical approach, and not to see this as as a simple way to bump up their own CVs. What is the right thing to do? Given the contributions of everybody, and therefore determining who should be the authors, who should instead be acknowledged in a footnote. Should the PhD student be the first author, etc. Important to discuss that at the outset, but also to discuss that in the context of, what all constitutes ethical behavior and responsible conduct as a researcher. I've just identified, spoken of one case or one example, but there are many, many other situations, and I think it is absolutely important that it be there as a topic of discussion alongside everything else. There's some wonderful material, by the way. When I worked some years ago before the International Science Council, I was with a body called the Inter-Academy Partnership, and the partnership published a little book on, in fact, called On Responsible Conduct in Science, which is directed very much towards graduate students and young researchers.
All right. Thank you a lot for that. And so, in one of your earlier responses to my question, when I was asking about building the kind of institutions that would allow us to do research, at the highest level, you mentioned really building a critical mass of young people involved in doing research. And in my own experience, graduating from UCT and talking to my friends and realizing all the kind of constraints that people are under, especially when you consider the kind of compensation you'd get from doing research, and mostly early on, and the kind of financial compensation you get in the corporate environment. What do you think are the kind of things that could be done to encourage young people to go into research and or development then?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, look, you've pointed to some of the realities, and I've seen this as well, where, particularly in the professional disciplines like engineering, where starting salaries are really not bad at all, and in any case, many students have a bursary obligation, which allows them certainly to be well funded through their studies, but with the obligation to work for the company thereafter. So you got all of this, and I know very, very well the challenges around chatting to students in their final year about postgraduate study, etc. Now, in some cases, there's not much persuading to be done about the attractiveness of it, because whether it's an engineering final year student or an honours student in the natural sciences, they, in a sense, in their final year, they get a taste of research through a major project, and it is often what turns them on to research and to be curious about the possibility of a research career and maybe an academic career. If it goes in that direction, I would then also, in these kinds of discussions, point out what to me are the huge attractions of an academic career. The freedom that one has to choose your research areas, working with young people all the time. I enjoy teaching, and for me that is part of the attraction of it also. Now you have all of that, but you have the money. You have the money side, and there's the thing. It could be the prospect of a well-paid job in industry, and the situation could also be made that much more complex by the fact that the student has, obligations to the family. All right, go and finish up, and once you are done, then, your younger brother or sister will be able to go to university, and you'll be able to assist in funding them, and so on. And I'm sure many of us are familiar with these sorts of situations. And then really the only way in which one can address that dilemma would be, well, firstly, let's say the person has a really good job offer with industry, to have a conversation with that person or those people in the industry concerned, to say, look, can we find some sort of a halfway solution here, where he or she is able to study part-time as a master's student, work at the same time. Let's make that possible, after which the student would then have some choices to make. That would be the one option. The other option, which sometimes works, is really if a supervisor is able to put together a package, financial package that is competitive with what industry is able to offer. And we're getting better and better at that as well. We've been jacking up PhD scholarship amounts and postdoc amounts as well. And sometimes you simply cannot compete. But in some cases, if one gets to not quite there but almost there, then it would be enough for the student to say, all right, this being the case, I can now be a postgraduate student. So it's something we grapple with all the time.
Yeah. I know that experience. So when Stellenbosch University conferred upon you an honorary doctorate in 2021, it was mentioned that you built bridges between the mathematical, engineering sciences and medical sciences. And you also grappled or wrestled with problems that defy rigid disciplinary pigeonholing. So today there's a lot of talk about encouraging interdisciplinary work, working at the intersection of fields. And this makes sense to me because really disciplines are man-made construction, right? Nature does not know about them. But I hardly see this being cultivated in schools and universities. So please share with us any ideas you have on how to encourage more interdisciplinary work, both in education and in research.
Yeah, well, I guess, the one simple point is that many of the most challenging problems lie at the intersection of disciplines. It certainly goes for our global challenges like climate change, global health challenges. We saw this with the COVID pandemic as well, which required real multidisciplinary approaches that went beyond virology or epidemiology, but which needed to include statistics, mathematics, and aspects of the social sciences as well. So this is what we have now. Now the thing is, what to do about it? I think that one has to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Disciplines are extremely important. They're the pillars on which everything else is built. It's true they're man or human made or defined, and likewise they change. They can and they should change with time. We never used to have a discipline of computer science. The discipline of molecular biology is one that would have been tucked away in the past in a department of biology, perhaps. It is a massive discipline in its own right. So they are mutable, and that is a good thing. What should we be doing about promoting interdisciplinary work? I think that there are certainly opportunities for this. For example, at the senior levels, when students are engaged in projects, I think it really is important, and we are, with our deans and others, discussing avenues to promoting multidisciplinary projects, which in a sense force students from different disciplines to work together. So I'm thinking here about collaborations as well, where they can see multidisciplinarity in action and learn about what it entails. So for example, when I first started working with colleagues at our medical school, clinicians and others, what I found was that we talk different languages, so we had to learn, in a sense, how to communicate. We had different senses of what is important, and we certainly had different ways of working. So we had to pull all of that together. So you have to spend time developing the relationship until you speak each other's language, so to speak. You understand each other. You define the problem together, and then you go on from there. And so this is the kind of experience which I think it would be so valuable for students to have, and it can be done. Having said that, we recognize that our disciplinary boundaries in the form of our departments very often are real barriers to this kind of work and activity. We come up against it time and again. You've got the strategic planning all fantastically done and so on, and you come up against bureaucratic obstacles that often, just if not quite killing the initiative, lead people to walk away. Really can't be bothered with having to grapple with this. So I think there we have a responsibility as well to develop this in certainly at the undergraduate level, and I think there are plenty of opportunities to do so, based on the problems that one can build these initiatives around.
Yeah. Also, like expanding on that, so I think for me at least, I did engineering at UCT, but I appreciated the mathematics a lot. And I thought it was a shame that, really there wasn't that communication between the maths department and the engineering department, having students who just finished their honors in mathematics and decided to do a postgraduate degree in engineering, or the other way around. So when I saw your work and I saw that you had joint appointments in both faculty or departments once, that was really interesting. Do you mind sharing with us how that time happened for you, or how you moved from one department to the other?
Yeah. Okay. So as we are all, now quite clear, my undergraduate work was in civil engineering. I went to Cambridge, and I was in the engineering department. So it's one engineering department, all branches, and I worked in an area that is fairly mathematical in civil engineering. Well, not even really civil engineering. It is in mechanics, which is all about how bodies deform under loading, or how fluids flow and so on, modeling it, etc. And it is my inclination anyway to head in that direction. In other words, a more theoretical direction. So that eventually my PhD work was, in an area that fitted equally comfortably in engineering or in applied mathematics. So that was the one thing. Then I told you earlier that I had been offered a position here, which was what led me eventually to decide to return. The position that I was offered was a lectureship in civil engineering, which the first time around I turned down, and I took up a postdoc. So I had a year in London as a postdoc at University College London. But then I decided to come back, and I went back to my professor and I said, is it still possible to return? And he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, they hadn't filled the position and it would be possible. Then, a little later, he came back to me and he said, I've been chatting with the head of applied mathematics, Professor George Ellis, and we're quite keen to build some bridges and between our two departments, and we were thinking, would you be interested in a joint appointment? And I said yes. So that's how it happened. So it was not my idea. It's an idea that came from these two professors who I've indicated earlier were mentors of mine, very forward thinking in that respect. So I think I was the first person to hold such an appointment here, and so I had responsibilities in both departments and, two offices and all that, which was wonderful, and which persisted for about 7 or 8 years, at which point I thought, no, actually I would like now just to be based in one department, but without severing the ties and the links to the other. So I went full-time into applied mathematics, but maintained, and throughout my whole career, maintained very, very strong links with engineering.
Thank you so much. That is a wonderful story. Our time is almost up, so I just one last question for you. Very briefly, you've had a really long career now, very fruitful, but what do you think you are most proud of?
Well, Okay, look, I would say that I'm proud of having been able to build a strong career in South Africa, in a sense showing that it can be done. Who knows how it would have turned out had I been somewhere else, but that is something that happened here. I certainly have traveled a lot and so on, but I've built my career here. And I'm proud of what I have been able to achieve here. That's the first. And if you would allow me 2 items, the second is that I'm really proud of my graduate students. I've graduated almost 40 PhDs and 35 or so master's students. And some of them have been really such bright individuals who have had such an influence on my career, and from whom I've learned such a lot, and who in many cases have gone on to do wonderful things. So I'm very proud of the fact that I've had a small role in their development and in relation to what they were able to achieve later on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Reddy. I really appreciate you taking an hour of your time to speak with us on this channel and the generosity with which you delivered your wisdom. I hope we can speak again in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kushla, and thank you very much again for inviting me. I've enjoyed this conversation very much, and I'd be happy to chat anytime. And all the best with your time at Oxford.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right then. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in and staying till this far. I hope you really enjoyed the interview, discussion, conversation I had with Professor Batmanathan, Dayanand, Reddy, because I really did enjoy it. I hope you learned something, found it interesting, or left inspired in one way or the other. And really, I appreciate you interacting with the content I put out here, either by liking, commenting, subscribing, everything. This channel really is worthless without that effort from your side. So if you haven't subscribed yet, may you please hit that subscribe button, like this video so that the YouTube algorithm can show it to more people. And if you know anyone else that would find this kind of content interesting, or at the very least entertaining, please share it with them. And again, thank you for tuning in. I will see you next time. Cheers.